Hello, thanks for watching another episode of Lessons on Galatians. Even though we're beginning a new chapter now, there is not a significant transition in subject matter. Paul begins a third autobiographical sketch to demonstrate that the gospel he preaches isn't a human message, but that it comes from God. It does not depend on any human authority. In the previous section, Paul told us about a low-profile trip to Jerusalem 3 years after his conversion to get acquainted with Peter. He also met James at that time. After that brief visit, he went back north to Syria and Cilicia, probably doing mission work in their major cities of Antioch and Tarsus. In the first 10 verses of chapter 2, he recounts another trip to Jerusalem quite some time later. This revolved around another low-profile meeting during which the unity between Paul's gospel and Jerusalem's gospel was confirmed, and a ministry plan was agreed upon in which Paul would concentrate his evangelizing efforts on Gentiles, while Peter would concentrate on Jews. Let's read the section. 14 years later, I went up again to Jerusalem, this time with Barnabas. I took Titus along also. I went in response to a revelation and set before them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. But I did this privately to those who seemed to be leaders, for fear that I was running or had run my race in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek. This matter arose because some false brothers had infiltrated our ranks to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus and to make us slaves. We did not give in to them for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might remain with you. As for those who seem to be important, whatever they were makes no difference to me. God does not judge by external appearance. Those men added nothing to my message. On the contrary, they saw that I had been entrusted with the task of preaching the gospel to the Gentiles, just as Peter had been to the Jews. For God, who was at work in the ministry of Peter as an apostle to the Jews, was also at work in my ministry as an apostle to the Gentiles. James, Peter, and John, those reputed to be pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me. They agreed that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the Jews. All they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. Assuming that Paul is still measuring time from the point of his conversion, this trip was very roughly around 45 AD. He went in response to a revelation. This might correspond to a prophecy through the prophet Agabus in Acts 11 about an upcoming famine. In response, Paul and Barnabas took gifts to help their fellow Christians in the area around Jerusalem, and this is perhaps the same trip Paul describes in Galatians. Paul took Barnabas and Titus along with him. Remember, the Galatians knew Barnabas from Paul's first missionary journey, and they apparently at least knew of Titus as well. This trip to Jerusalem would give Paul and the leaders of the Jerusalem church the opportunity to confirm the unity of their message, and therefore also to confirm the unity of the Christian church, which was not restricted to certain races or cultures, but was for all nations. When Paul writes, "For fear that I was running or had run my race in vain," he's not saying that he was afraid that he didn't have the gospel right. That would go against everything he's written so far about its divine origin and its independence from human authority. However, it was necessary to ensure that the other apostles in Jerusalem were preaching that same divine message. There's only one gospel and one Christianity. If the church were divided against itself, how could it stand? So to that end of ensuring unity, there was a private, low-profile conference that included Paul, Barnabas, Titus, and also those who were recognized as leaders, which is a better translation than those who seemed to be leaders. In verse 9, Paul identifies those leaders as James, Peter, and John. There were also at least a few others present at the meeting whom Paul describes as false brothers who had infiltrated our ranks to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus and to make us slaves. Don't picture these spies as hiding under the table or standing just outside the room pressing their ears against the door. Their presence was out in the open. Their intentions were hidden. That they were false brothers implies that they were masquerading as true brothers. Maybe they were even invited to the meeting by James, Peter, and John. It would seem that during the meeting, while Paul was presenting the gospel he preached among the Gentiles, the topic of Titus's circumcision, or more precisely his lack of circumcision, came up. An uncircumcised Gentile Christian was a clear example of Paul's law-free message and the freedom we have in Christ. Circumcision wasn't required for Titus to enjoy salvation from Jesus. The false brothers didn't like that. In an effort to subject Titus to Jewish law as a condition of Christianity, they were pressuring him to be circumcised. But Paul, Barnabas, and Titus refused to budge on the matter because it wasn't just a matter of circumcision. The truth of the gospel was at stake. For Titus to be circumcised in this situation would be for him, and for the others by extension, to concede that salvation doesn't come through faith in Jesus alone, but through faith in Jesus plus obedience to Jewish law. And Jesus plus the law is no gospel at all. In order to keep these videos to a manageable length, we're going to discuss the rest of this private meeting in Jerusalem in the next video. If you have time, you can go ahead and start that now. If not, I'll see you there next time.